See how executing Daniel Lee will honor my daughter in any way. Because she wouldn't want it, and I don't want it.
From the tape off the bodies that links to the truck, to the paint off the truck that they were driving at the time. All along we knew, but until you get something to put it, and when you get the paint.
And know that I don't want this to happen.
Powell, 2 of 3 that were brutally murdered in 1996. Now she tells me that
I think the judge is going to suspend this until after the pandemic. I'm hoping and praying for that.
It would be fatal to that inmate. The costs associated with running the fence are far.
This execution said that Lee's final words were that your murder.
There are some AR-15s missing. There are some other weapons missing, ammunition.
A white supremacist, neo-Nazi, and convicted slayer. That's how people will remember Daniel Lewis Lee, the 4th person fatally punished by the federal government. But to his very last breath, Lee proclaimed his innocence. What landed Lee on the row? Let's dive in. His crime. It all began in January 1996, when Lee and Kehoe left the state of Washington and traveled to Arkansas. On January 11, 1996, they arrived at the home of William Frederick Mueller, a gun dealer who lived near Tilly, Arkansas, who possessed a large collection of weapons, ammunition, and cash. Kehoe and his father had robbed Mueller in February 1995, and Kehoe expected to find valuable property at the house. Dressed in police raid clothing, Lee and Kehoe tried to enter Mueller's home, but the family was not in. When they returned, Lee and Kehoe overpowered and incapacitated Mueller and his wife, Nancy Ann. They then questioned Nancy Mueller's 8-year-old daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Powell, about where they could find the cash, guns, and ammunition, forcing her to talk by shocking her with an electric cattle prod. After finding $50,000 in cash and gold and $30,000 worth of firearms and firearm parts, they shot each of the 3 victims with a stun gun. They then placed plastic bags over their heads and sealed the bags with duct tape, suffocating them. They took the victims in Kehoe's vehicle to the Illinois Bayou River 45 miles away, where they taped rocks to them and threw each family member into the swamp. Lee received $3,000 or $4,000 and a pistol for his part in the crime.
Erlene Peterson, she's the mother of Nancy Mueller and the grandmother of 8-year-old Sarah.
If I could talk personally to President Trump, I feel he could feel my heart. See how executing Daniel Lee will honor my daughter in any way. Because she wouldn't want it, and I don't want it. Trump is a God-fearing man. I voted for him, and I'd vote for him again in 220 if he runs. And know that I don't want this to happen.
The bodies were discovered in Lake Dardanelle near Russellville, Arkansas in late June 1996. Kehoe and his family took the stolen property to a motel in Spokane, Washington. On June 17, 1997, Kehoe was arrested in Cedar City, Utah, and Lee was soon after.
There are some AR-15s missing. There are some other weapons missing, ammunition. And at this point, the details were sketchy, but they are going.
We have the 2 people who were directly involved with the murder of Bill and Nancy Mueller. And all along we knew, but until you get something to put it, and when you get the paint, you know, you get a real comfortable feeling about what you're doing.
Crime and sentencing. The Mueller family slayings were a federal crime since they had been committed to support a racketeering enterprise, hence prosecutors sought the capital punishment for both Kehoe and Lee. When Kehoe was sentenced to life imprisonment, federal prosecutors initially planned to pursue a similar sentence of life imprisonment for accomplice Daniel Lewis Lee, but were directed by the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington to argue for a fatal sentence. U.S. Attorney Paula Casey requested U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno to withdraw the jeopardy of capital punishment, but was told by Deputy U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder to continue seeking a fatal sentence. On May 4, 1999, Lee received the capital sentence for 3 counts of slaying in aid of racketeering, after the prosecution pointed to his previous convictions as evidence that he was a future danger to society. The mother of Nancy Mueller, Erlene Branch Peterson, pleaded for clemency on behalf of Lee. She stated, "I can't see how slaying Daniel Lee will honor my daughter in any way. In fact, it's kind of like it dirties her name, because she wouldn't want it and I don't want it." Throughout the 2000s, Lee tried to get a new trial, but in July 2004, the 8th Circuit affirmed Lee's conviction and sentence on the merits. Lee was scheduled to be punished on December 9, 2019, and would have been the first inmate to be fatally punished by the federal government since the fatal punishment of Lewis Jones Jr. in 2003.
So when we found out about it, we checked with Ohio to find out what information they have, to give us a complete inventory of what they find in the vehicle.
From the tape off the bodies that links to the truck, to the paint off the truck that they were driving at the time.
I think that remains to be seen. This Aryan People's Republic, they were engaged in criminal activity.
On November 20th, 2019, U.S. District Judge Tanya S. Chutkan issued a preliminary injunction preventing the resumption of federal punishments. Lee and other 3 plaintiffs in the case argued that the use of pentobarbital may violate the Federal Demise Penalty Act of 1994. It seemed their plea had worked, and on December 5, 2019, an Indiana federal court stayed Lee's punishment, but the United States Court of Appeal for the 7th Circuit vacated it. The punishment date was set for July 13, 2020, the first of several federal punishments scheduled after the D.C. Circuit's ruling. The victims' families asked for a rescheduling of the date, saying they were unable to travel to witness the punishment due to the COVID-19 pandemic in the U.S.
I think the judge is going to suspend this until after the pandemic. I'm hoping and praying for that.
Thursday or as late as Monday, the day the execution is scheduled to happen. Until then, Peterson said, Powell, 2 of 3 that were brutally murdered in 1996. Now she tells me that all the way to Indiana to see the execution. Right now, Daniel Lewis Lee is set to be put to death Monday at
10 o'clock this morning, praying about it.
But the 7th Circuit ruled that while allowing the victims' families to attend such events is standard practice, there are no rights or legal basis for their attendance, and denied a change in date. The victims' family sent an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court. Before the Supreme Court could rule, Judge Chutkan ordered a halt to all federal punishments on the basis that the process was very likely to cause extreme pain and needless suffering. Yet in the early morning of July 14, 2020, the Supreme Court lifted the hold that Judge Chutkan previously implemented. This action allowed the Department of Justice to proceed with the punishment. Lee was punished later that morning.
Aryan People's Republic, and in order to finance this revolution and establish
It was obvious to us this was a different type of situation that we had dealt with before.
Forward, whenever all of this litigation was taken care of, room to see if they could get an update, and she said, oh, turn around, and the curtain went up.
Lee's final moments. Lee was the first federal inmate to be fatally punished since 2003. While judges considered a last-minute appeal from Lee's attorneys that the 8th Circuit Court had not issued a mandate to carry out the punishment, Lee remained strapped to the gurney for about 4 hours. He remained with his attorney and spiritual advisor, an Appalachian pagan minister. About 20 witnesses watched the punishment in 4 separate rooms. At 7:46 a.m., the shades on windows in each room were opened to reveal Lee strapped to the gurney with his arms out to his sides and 2 IV lines running from a port in the wall behind him. Lee was asked if he wanted to make a final statement. Lee was defiant and asserted his innocence and criticized the court system for ignoring DNA evidence. He denied committing the crime, stating, "I didn't do it. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but I'm not a slayer. You're slaying an innocent man," he said. He said he and his co-defendant were in another part of the country at the time of the slayings, but it was of no use. It took 2 or 3 minutes after the drugs were administered for Lee to perish, according to a witness.
Would be fatal to that inmate. The costs associated with running the fence are far unit. We do have windows in our general population cells. The security housing unit is designed.
He didn't appear to be suffering. His lips moved like he was blowing bubbles, but nothing came out. At one point, he raised his head slightly, then lay it back down. He became still at 8:02 a.m., but remained on the table for another 5 minutes before he was pronounced deceased. Controversy surrounding drugs used. Lee was among more than a dozen people attached to a lawsuit, arguing that the drug injection violates their 8th Amendment rights, essentially that the effects of the drug after it is administered constitute cruel and unusual punishment. The Bureau of Prisons uses a single drug, pentobarbital, in punishment. States started using it for punishment in 2011 due to a shortage of sodium thiopental, which was previously used in these punishments, along with pancuronium bromide and potassium chloride. Lee and the other inmates' attorneys argued the drug is likely to cause extreme pain as it induces flash pulmonary edema, producing a drowning sensation. In 2014, Oklahoma used a combination of pentobarbital, potassium chloride, and vecuronium bromide to punish convicted slayer Michael Lee Wilson. As the drugs were administered, Wilson said, "I feel my whole body burning," before he perished. While the district court judge agreed that there may be merit to their argument, members of the Supreme Court did not, saying the drug has become a mainstay of state punishments because, the court said, it has been used over 100 times without incident, is considered less painful than other lethal injection protocols, and its use has been upheld by several appeals courts when challenged against the Eighth Amendment. Why capital punishment so rare? Under the U.S. justice system, crimes can be tried either in federal courts at a national level or state courts at a regional level. Certain crimes, such as counterfeiting currency or mail theft, are automatically tried at a federal level, as are cases in which the U.S. is a party or those which involve constitutional violations. Others can be tried in federal courts based on the severity of the crimes. The capital punishment was outlawed at the state and federal levels by a 1972 Supreme Court decision that canceled all existing capital penalty statutes.
This execution said that Lee's final words were that you're murdered his innocence, saying that he played no role in the murders of these family members that actually occurred. Witnesses, though, say it only took a few moments after the drugs were administered about Lee's execution and if the other executions will go on as planned this week.
A 1976 Supreme Court decision allowed states to reinstate the penalty, and in 1988, the government passed legislation that made it available again at a federal level. According to data collected by the Demise Penalty Information Center, 78 people were sentenced to the capital punishment in federal cases between 1988 and 2018, but only 3 have since been fatally punished. Lee's punishment was to be one of 4 scheduled for those months, and he was the 1,520th person punished in the United States since 1976, the 4th person fatally punished in the federal system, and the 1,340th person fatally punished by lethal injection. That's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.